Fishing minigames have become a staple of video games in general. No matter what you are, an adventure game, life sim, RPG, you need to have a fishing minigame. I've recently realized just how many games I've played have these minigames, and so I decided to put them all on a tier list, and today it's just about the minigame. I don't care if the rewards are worth going out of your way for, I don't care if it's a particularly good or bad fit for the game it's in, just the minigame. Now the minigame itself can be narrowed down to 3 parts: the cast, and this will include any preparation before the cast, the hook, and the reel. We'll take a look at how each game approaches each part. We're going to start from the earliest release date and work our way forward so that we can see the evolution or devolution of fishing minigames. Now, as far as I can tell, Link's Awakening seems to have the earliest fishing minigame ever, which really surprised me because I know the Legend of the River King series actually goes all the way back to Famicom, but turns out the earliest game in that series doesn't even have fishing. So here we are. This fishing minigame takes place on a 2D plane. There's not going to be too many of these. You can choose where to cast and you can tap the A button if you want to reel in the bobber. If the hook goes anywhere near a fish, that fish will bite on, at which point you just mash the A button to reel it in. There's no resistance mechanic, there's no line break, just reel it in. It's simple but effective. I do think it's a little held back by the fact that there's only one fish in this entire pond that you actually want to catch. It's the one to the bottom right of the screen. All of the small fish actually result in a loss of money when you consider the entrance fee, so you don't want to catch them. But if you do, that gets them out of the way for the next cast, so there is sort of a reason to go for them. Gotta put a little bit of respect on its name for being the absolute first, so we'll go with a solid B. Pokemon Red and Blue is next, releasing in 1996, 3 years later. Now I just want to say, this isn't to say that there absolutely wasn't any other fishing minigames in that time frame. These are all games that I have played. Not going to talk about games I don't know. Before you actually go fishing, you do have a choice of 3 different rods in this game, each allowing you to catch different fish. But it doesn't affect the minigame at all, so for our purposes, it can be ignored. To fish, all you have to do is walk up to any type of water, cast, then wait for the exclamation point to pop up over your head, and react in time to hook the fish. Now, you could argue that the Pokemon battle that ensues afterwards is the reeling segment, since it is what determines if you actually catch the fish or not. I'm not gonna count that. This minigame is incredibly simple, but what works to its favor is it's so fast, so it's allowed to be simple. That said, I am going to put it in C. It's not really doing anything. We're gonna come back to the Pokemon series one more time later, as the fishing mechanics do change a bit. Next up is Legend of the River King, released in August 1998. This is the first game we're talking about that is all about fishing, and does that give it an unfair advantage? Yes. Do I care? No. This game introduces so many mechanics that are going to be staples in future fishing games. Different baits being able to catch different fish. Having various upgrades allowing you to do things like reel in your cast after casting it. In terms of the cast, it kind of works like a top-down version of Link's Awakening where you have to cast it in front of the fish that you want to bite. And they're very picky where you position it. The fish will circle the bobber a bit before biting, where you then hook it. Then begins this cool side view for the reeling minigame. This is the first time where you can see what fish you hooked, so you can decide whether to let it go or not. If you want to catch it, you need to reel when it gives you some slack and stop reeling when it starts swimming away. Different fish are going to have different swim patterns. Some are more aggressive, some are less, and some will swap between the 2 modes more often than others. Once you reel it in enough, you've caught the fish. This whole system essentially lays the groundwork for every single fishing minigame going forward, so it's gotta go in S. Ocarina of Time makes an attempt at a full 3D fishing minigame. This means you get the joy of being able to position yourself in an environment to cast your line, and that sounds like nothing, but it's actually a big deal. It's much more interesting than going to the pre-designated spot to cast your line, so you pretty much have the same cast every time. Now there's a little bit of the minigame outside of the minigame. As usual, you want to cast your line near the fish that you want to catch. The smaller, less impressive fish will hone in on the hook a lot quicker than the bigger fish that you actually want to catch. If you want them to let go, you can leave them be, don't hook. and they'll eventually leave, but it will displace your hook, so you might need to recast. Or you can reposition it by tapping the A button. You can make it wiggle, do like the little worm dance like you would with real fishing. I'm always a fan of when that's included. Once you hook a fish that you want to catch, all you do from that point on is hold the A button and hold the control stick downwards. No matter what direction the fish is moving, that's all you do, and you'll have a chance to catch it or a chance for it to break the line. One other fun little addition that I like that you can do is you can equip the iron boots to walk into the water and scout out the fish. Otherwise, if you're looking from the surface, it's a bit cloudy, it's hard to tell what fish is where. You do gotta be careful though, because if you walk too close to a fish, you'll scare it away, and then you'll have to exit and re-enter the area if you want it to spawn again. It's a solid simulation. I just wish they did a little more for the reeling in minigame, but it's gonna go in A. Now we have to talk about Mario Party, specifically the minigame Castaways, and I had to include it because it's unique. I will say, I do actually like the way you cast. Depending on how far you tilt the control stick downwards, that'll determine how far you cast. So you tilt the control stick a little bit, you cast close. If you tilt it all the way back, you cast really far away. You're not catching fish, you're just aiming at an item. It's really more of a timing minigame than anything. But where the real fun comes in is while you're reeling in. You want to rotate the control stick as fast as possible, which, yeah, it simulates the reeling in of an actual fishing rod, but the control stick on the Nintendo 64 is hard plastic and ribbed. And people found that the best way to rotate the control stick is to use the palm of your hand and move in a circular motion. This did not feel good. In fact, it felt so bad that it resulted in actual injury, and Nintendo ended up having to pay $75,000 in damages, as well as they had to give out gloves to anyone who owned the game and asked for one. So yeah, I don't think any of the other fishing minigames resulted in legal troubles, so I'm gonna put this one in F. Next up is Sonic Adventure. This one's going to be a very weird one to rate because the fishing minigame itself isn't too bad. When casting, you can choose exactly where it goes, and of course, as always, you want to aim for the fish that you're going for, and you can do slight reel-ins to adjust where your hook is. But now is when the issues start to come up. In Ocarina of Time, if you wanted to look at the fish you were trying to catch, you would Z-target them. There's no system like this in Sonic Adventure, so whenever you cast your line, you're looking straight ahead. You can't move the camera at all, so you have no idea what's going on with the fish around you. Once a fish does grab onto the line, you need to move your control stick back to hook them. And then for the actual reeling in section, you have a pretty inoffensive mini game. You just pull the control stick back to start reeling in. That'll increase your meter. You don't want the meter to hit the very top or the very bottom, otherwise your line will break. So you gotta balance reeling in with letting go. The way that fishing progression works in this game is that you need to catch Froggy, and only Froggy, for your generic missions. This is all incredibly easy. You can catch Froggy each time, no issues. However, once you go for the extra missions, which is where you finally are allowed to start fishing for other fish, mind you, no reason to do so in the regular missions. That's when things get hairy, because these extra fish are incredibly difficult. And if you didn't know that there's random upgrades around the world that you needed to collect that make it easier to catch this fish, once again, not told to you at all, then you will, simply put, not catch these fish. I don't know if I want to put this in F because there are redeeming qualities. Being able to choose exactly where you cast your line, or the fact that this is the first instance of seeing that little bar minigame that becomes standard in future games. So I'm gonna put this in C for now. I think the issue that most people tend to have is that this is a fishing minigame that's required for game completion, and while that is an issue, that's not what we're looking at. Once again, we're just looking at the minigame itself. From the lowest of lows, we go to the highest of highs, Animal Crossing. I'm gonna rate all the games together here because I don't think the fishing minigame has changed enough title to title to require a new rating. When you cast your line in Animal Crossing, it always goes a fixed amount, so you need to position yourself to where the cast will go directly in front of the fish you want to catch. Now you do need to be confident in your cast, because if you cast it in front of the fish and the fish is looking at it and then you reel it back, the fish is gonna be scared off. And you can't reel it in tiny segments segments, you either reel it all the way back or you let the hook sit. And it will drift a little with the movement of the water, so you can leave it to see if the fish will eventually notice. As for what fish you're aiming for, the fish are going to be represented as shadows in the water, and there's a couple of different sizes of these shadows. Generally, the larger the shadow, the rarer the fish. That's not always true, but it's a general rule. Once the fish sees the bobber, it's going to start tapping it every few seconds. And randomly on one of these taps, it's actually gonna grab the hook, and that's when you wanna react and catch it. There is no reeling in minigame. If you time your press right, you will catch the fish. The thing is, the rarer the fish, the more precise you need to be with your timing. And these get so precise that for some of the rarest fish in the game, you'll probably have to guess when it's going to bite and not react, adding even more difficulty to the rarer fish. This is probably the simplest minigame on this entire list that manages to have the most skill expression. I'm kind of between an A and an S tier because there's nothing it really does wrong. I suppose it could do a little more, so I'm gonna put this as a high A. The next game is Jak and Daxter. This one's a little bit of an oddball. It's not the kind of game that you would expect to see a fishing minigame in, but there it is. Funny enough, this is actually our first example of not rod fishing, but net fishing. You have a top-down view of the river and you simply need to move the net back and forth to catch the good fish and avoid the bad fish. And if you catch enough of the good fish, you win. It works surprisingly well for a very brief part of the game that never shows up again. It's fine for what it is, but it is more of a one and done type minigame. There's no depth, you just do it. It'll sit solidly in B. Now for Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. So the reason this is separate from Pokemon Red and Blue is because they did change up the minigame a bit. Instead of reacting to one exclamation point, you now have a random amount of exclamation points to react to. And you may think, like I originally did, that the more exclamation points, the rarer the Pokemon, right? No, it's actually dependent on which of the 3 rods you're using. For the good and the super rod, there's essentially a 50-50 chance that you either catch the fish or get another exclamation point minigame, and each rod has a cap on the amount of times that you can have the minigame. Now, I don't know about you, but when I have to react to 5 exclamation points, focusing for like 15 seconds just to catch one Pokemon, I hate it. It's awful. It is actually worse than the original fishing minigame. We are popping this one in C. Next up, we have Twilight Princess. First of all, there's 2 different kinds of fishing in this game: lure fishing and bait fishing. Bait fishing requires you to gather the resources yourself through like beehives or whatever, and you're allowed to bait fish wherever you want in the game. Whereas lure fishing has to be done at the designated fishing hole. Mechanically, they're not that different. Very much like Ocarina of Time, you're allowed to position yourself wherever you want and then cast your line. If you could imagine it, you want to cast your line in front of the fish you want to catch. Now, if you're bait fishing, you can slightly wiggle your line like you could in Ocarina of Time to reposition your hook. If you're lure fishing though, you sit and you wait for a fish to come that's interested in the lure. Once you've attracted the attention of a fish, you hook it once the bobber reaches the right level, or for bait fishing, whenever it bites on. Then for the reeling in minigame, you have the first proper evolution in a while. You need to tilt the control stick in the opposite direction the fish is moving. And once the fish starts to give you some slack, you press A to start reeling it in. Do either of these processes wrong and the line will break. All of that is just the minigame, but it doesn't even mention the fact that there's different seasons that you can enter the fishing hole in. Depending on the time of day, the water might be foggier or it might be easier to see the fish. And there's different lures that attract different fish. And Twilight Princess can count its blessings that we're not considering roll goal in this ranking. If Ocarina of Time was A, this has to be S with the improvements it's made. Next up is Okami. Even though it's a very similar game to Twilight Princess, the fishing is completely different. In Okami, there's a couple of places that are designated fishing holes, and if you walk up to them and decide to fish, you will stand in a flat spot, and then you need to draw your line onto the fish you want to catch. And it should be mentioned that these fish are in the form of sized shadows in a system kind of similar to Animal Crossing. You don't know exactly what you're attaching to. Then once you've hooked onto that fish, you play our classic bar minigame where you need to tap the A button to stay in the good green section of the bar. Harder fish will of course be a little harder to manage, but it never really gets too difficult. I'd say they're all fairly easy. Once you've reeled the fish in long enough, you'll get a button prompt, and and then the fish will leap out of the water where you then slice it. Now I will say, I do like that it uses the unique mechanics of Okami for fishing. The drawing your line is really neat. Other than that though, it's super by the books, and I think it's a huge detriment that you can't see exactly what fish you're hooking onto. Because this means if you're going for one of the rarer fish, you're going to be standing in the same spot, hooking onto the same sized shadow over and over and over again until you finally get that fish. You're not walking around doing other things in the game in the meantime. You're standing in a spot, playing the same fishing minigame over and over again. It gets tiring very quickly. That said, I think I'm going to put it in B because at a casual glance, it's fine, it's fun, but if you're going for completion, that's when it starts to struggle. You know we couldn't do this without talking about the fishing minigame in Wii Play. As opposed to all these other systems where it's like a mini game within the world of the game, this is like a menu, you choose fishing, and now you're fishing. Now being on the Wii, it does use motion controls, which I suppose Twilight Princess does as well if you're playing it on the Wii, but I never played it with motion controls, I don't know. What you need to do is dip your hand, physically, you're moving your arm into the water to lower the hook into the water. As always, you want it to be in front of the fish you're aiming for. The smaller fish will grab on quickly, but the rarer fish will take their time. So you want to make sure you're in a spot where the smaller fish probably won't notice you. And just like Animal Crossing, after a few taps, it'll grab on and then you physically pull back with the Wii remote and catch it. And you're not always just gunning for the big fish. Every now and again, a rare fish will be listed on the top and you have to go for that for double points. There's not much to it, but it's fun. The motion controls make it pretty unique. I'm gonna put it in, I feel like this is gonna be controversial. I think it's gonna go in A. Minecraft fishing has gone through a couple of changes over the years. Right now we're going to talk about the most recent iteration. Now before you start fishing, you do have to craft your fishing rod. It's easy to do, but it is a barrier to entry nonetheless. You can also enchant your fishing rod with a couple of different effects. Some of them change the rate at which you catch treasure, and most notably, one changes the speed at which you catch a fish, which is a pretty big deal, as I'll explain in a second. So you can freely aim to cast your bobber. A 45-degree angle will give you the farthest cast, or you could cast directly at your feet. None of that matters because the spot that the bobber lands has no effect at all. You can even fish underwater if you want to. Once the bobber hits water, you will be waiting between 5 and 30 seconds for a fish to appear. You'll know a fish has appeared when some bubbles start heading towards your bobber, and once they hit your bobber, you want to reel it in, and congrats, you caught something. Now, I don't think I need to tell you that 30 seconds is a crazy wait time for something that just devolves into pressing the button once. Luckily, you can lower that with the lure enchantment for an up to 15-second decrease, and then if you're fishing in the rain, that will have the time to catch. So with all of those buffs, it's pretty quick and more fun. At the end of the day though, it's a very simple system that is lifted up by the possibility of buffs from enchantments. I think I'll put it in the middle at B. Speaking of very simple fishing games, we have Runecsape next. Old school Runecsape specifically, which was remade in 2013. I'm not gonna go into it. Anyway, in this game, it's an MMO. You click on a fishing spot and you start fishing. There it is. You do need to make sure that you have the proper fishing equipment to be able to fish in that fishing spot, but that's about it. And if that was all we had to talk about, this would be going in F, I'm sorry. But there are 2 other fishing minigames. There's also the fishing trawler, which is universally hated by the player base. As a concept, it's pretty interesting. Instead of just outright fishing, you're constantly repairing a boat that then brings a haul of fish home and you get a share of it. That's how it is if you're playing solo or in a small group, but most of the time, you're going to be playing in a mass group with a ton of other people. And in this case, you need to guarantee that you're going to do enough to get a part of the haul. But there's so many people doing everything pretty much instantaneously that all the gameplay boils down to is spam clicking a part that can break so that the moment it breaks, you repair it. That sucks. Also F tier. Luckily, there is a fishing boss called Temporos. Now this is a little more in-depth. The basic gameplay loop here is going to be that basic click fishing that we talked about before. Optionally, you can then cook the fish for more points and cooking experience, and then loading the fish up into a cannon to be shot at the boss. And once you lower that boss's defenses, you then harpoon the boss directly. While you're doing this core gameplay loop, you're going to be hit with giant waves where you then need to moor yourself to a pole to protect yourself, or fires will start around the island you're fishing on and you need to put them out or just avoid them. Tons more interesting than the other two minigames. This, for me, would go into B tier, but since I'm not doing specific methods, I'm just gonna take the average of all three and put it into a low C tier. Funny enough, we have another MMO directly after that, both were 2013, Final Fantasy XIV. If you can imagine using an MMO hotbar of skills just for fishing, that's essentially what it is. It starts out, you just walk up to a bit of water, you cast your line, and you wait for the exclamation point to show up just like Pokemon, and you hook the fish, and it is automatically caught. But as you level up, you'll get new skills that allow you to fish in different things like lava or sand or space. You get skills that allow you to increase the quality of the fish or target a specific size of fish. And all of these skills use resources on a resource meter and also affect the chance that you will actually catch the fish. Luckily, you get skills that require some of that resource that increase the catch chance, so you need to balance all of these things. It's literally playing like an MMO class, and it's unlike any other system I've ever played. All of that, and I'm not even talking about ocean fishing or spear fishing in this, because that would just be too much to talk about for one game. Final Fantasy XIV is gonna go in S tier. We've arrived at Stardew Valley. A lot of you probably know where this is going to go, but for those who don't, in Stardew Valley, you fish by casting your line into the water. This has a meter of its own that determines how far you cast. The farther into the water you cast, the higher the quality of the fish you'll catch. And some fish can only be caught if you cast far enough away from land. You then need to do the classic reacting to the exclamation point to hook the fish. And then you enter the reeling in minigame where you need to balance this bar on the fish icon that's going to be jumping up and down. Every single fish has unique movement to the point where if you just see the movement of the fish, it's possible that you could guess what fish it is. In fact, there's a whole like Wordle type game dedicated to that. Once this bar fills up, you will catch the fish. If it runs out, the fish will get away. Historically, this is a very hard fishing minigame compared to most others. If you find yourself having trouble, you can either level up your fishing skill using other fishing methods, or you can equip the training rod, which gives you a much larger fishing bar at lower levels. Then as you level up, you'll be able to cast farther into the water, and you unlock new types of baits and tackle, making this the most customizable fishing experience you can imagine. Depending on your loadout, you could make fish bite faster. You can increase the chance of a treasure chest for extra loot popping up, essentially giving you a side quest for the fishing minigame. You could even make a setup that automatically makes the bar track the fish so you don't have to play the minigame at all. I don't think there's any other game where you can make a loadout for fishing. It's easily going to go into S tier. Heading back to simpler times a bit, we're going to go to Sea of Thieves. Much like Minecraft, you can cast into any body of water and there will be fish there to bite. You don't really need to aim anywhere in particular, but different areas and different weathers will have different types of fish. So while you don't need to choose where to cast, you do need to choose where to be. Different fish will also bite for different types of bait, which you can find foraging yourself, or you can buy it from a shop. After a little bit, a fish will appear and head towards your bobber, at which point you can choose to pull out so you don't waste your bait if it's a fish you don't want, or you can wait for it to bite. Once it bites, you hook it as you usually do, and then you play a minigame very similar to Twilight Princess, where you need to pull the rod in the opposite direction the fish is moving, and then press the A button once it gives you some slack. And eventually you'll reel in the fish. And just like Twilight Princess, I find it to be very entertaining, so it goes into A. Red Dead Redemption 2. Just like many other things in this game, it takes a very realistic approach to fishing. You need to have the appropriate type of bait to catch specific fish in a specific area. Once you've cast your line, you then want to attract fish by slowly reeling it in and doing the wiggling motion that you would in real life. Now, as I've said before in other games, you can do this, but it never really had an attracting fish effect. It was more so just to position your hook. This is one of the only times where it actually attracts fish by doing the wiggling motion. To reel it in, you do a rotating motion with the right stick, which is very satisfying. Slowly, mind you, not as fast as you can. Once you've properly attracted the fish and you hook it by reacting to its bite, you then lean the rod away from where the fish is moving when it's struggling by using the left stick, and then once it stops resisting, start reeling it in by rotating the right stick. This is such a good mini game. It's just about as in-depth as you can get, and just goes a couple of steps farther than Twilight Princess or Ocarina of Time went, so it's gonna go an S. Next up is Fire Emblem Three Houses. This is one of those situations where you go up to the designated fishing spot and you always cast from there, except this time you don't get to choose where to cast, you just use a bait and you will catch a fish. There is still a reeling minigame and it's cute, it kinda has like the Fire Emblem UI, but the minigame itself is just a rhythm game. You press A when the two circles align. I think of all types of possible fishing minigames you could have, rhythm is one of my least favorite. It's by far the most boring and not representative of fishing you could have. This is really one of those situations where it feels like they included it just to check off a box and say that their game has fishing. I have to put this in F. It's not fun at all. Monster Hunter Rise. Now, previous Monster Hunter games did have fishing. It very slowly evolved into what we have in Rise, so that'll be the one we talk about. When you're out on a hunt, you can find these secluded fishing areas that allow you to fish for fish. I will say I very much enjoy the process of finding these fishing holes. Sometimes they're very hidden, and that's usually where you find the better fish. As for the fishing itself, you can choose where to place your hook, and then you just react to the fish biting it. It's the couple of taps and then finally a bite system that many other games have had. You can see what type of fish you're gonna catch, so you can strategically place it to get that specific fish, which is kind of important because fish have very different uses in this game. It's not just catching the fish, but again, we're not going into all that. It's okay. My favorite part of the minigame is finding the fishing spots, which doesn't talk well about the minigame itself. It'll go into a B. Getting real modern here, we're moving on to Dredge 2023. This is another game that is completely based on fishing, and like I said earlier, you'd think that would give it an advantage, but not necessarily. In this game, you completely operate out of a boat, so you simply just go over the fishing spot and activate the fishing minigame. There's no cast. There's not even really a hook mechanic. It forgoes 2 of the 3 sections of the fishing minigame straight onto reeling, which is, unfortunately, a rhythm minigame. Also worth mentioning, you can't fail these minigames. If you do absolutely nothing, you will catch the fish. It'll just take a little longer. And here's the thing about it. I know why they did it this way. I know they made it so simple because you're going to be fishing hundreds of times in this game. If it was anything longer or more complex, that would get a little bit tiring. But if I'm just looking at the fishing minigame, this is as boring as it gets. I'll put it in C because it's short and sweet and somewhat satisfying. Whereas even though Fire Emblems was also a rhythm minigame, it was really long and drawn out. Roots of Pacha also came out in 2023, which may sound like a super random pull if you're hearing about this game for the first time, but it does fishing in a way that I've really never seen done before, and it's kind of fun. It's actually not rod type fishing, it's more like spear fishing if anything. Once you start the fishing minigame, you're gonna have your cursor, this is a mouse and keyboard game only, and you need to aim at the fish for the bar to start filling up. Every now and again, the fish will start to get spooked and you have to move your cursor away. Once it stops being spooked, you need to move back quickly before your bar completely depletes again. Keep doing that until you fully fill the bar and then you attack and catch the fish. It never really gets any harder than that. Pretty much all the fish behave the exact same, but I thought it was worth mentioning because it's so distinct from everything else. I'm gonna put this right on the middle at B. Webfishing. This is our third and final game that's completely about fishing. When casting your line in this game, you can do it anywhere. There's no fish to aim at. Whether you do it in freshwater or saltwater does matter because there's different fish in each of those, but you're free to choose where you cast. Once you get a bite, you will automatically hook it and the minigame begins. It's very simple. You hold down your button until you reach these locks where you then need to mash through them. And how many times you need to mash will depend on how rare the fish is, how many upgrades you've bought, and then once you get to the bottom of the bar, you catch it. Seems pretty simple, but just like with Stardew Valley, there's a lot of ways to customize your experience here. There's upgrades that make the fish rarer and harder to catch, and there's upgrades that make the mashing easier. If you want, you can buy the upgrades that make the fish harder to catch first, giving you a harder minigame with more rewards reward to it. Or you could buy the mashing upgrades first, which makes the minigame a lot easier, but it'll take longer to earn the extra money to get your other upgrades. There's even one lure that adds an extra minigame to the fishing minigame, allowing you to earn even more money when catching fish. I think this type of customization to your experience when fishing is enough to boost this up to an A. We have one more. This is for a game that technically hasn't come out yet, but it's in early access, Fields of Mistria. You can treat this almost exactly like a 2D version of Animal Crossing's fishing system. Different fish are represented by different types of shadows in the water. Unlike Animal Crossing, you can choose how far to cast, and there's upgrades that allow you to cast farther into the water. But once you cast, you can't reel it in slowly. You either pull it out or leave it. Once the fish notices, it'll tap a few times. One of those times will be the bite, and you have to react in time to pull it out. Now, I will say the reaction time isn't nearly as strict as Animal Crossing's. You're going to be able to catch these fish pretty dang easily. So there's a slight bit less skill expression there. Now, my thing is, this is almost the exact same as Animal Crossing's. It is so close. And whereas in previous games, when they've come after, say, Ocarina of Time, for instance, they've made an addition, they've improved it in some way. I don't know if I can give that same benefit here. I think I'm gonna put it in B because yes, it's fun, just like Animal Crossing's, but it's not adding anything. And that is my full list. There's probably games I have played that have fishing minigames and I completely forgot about them. It is so common. Tell me what games you've played that you enjoy the fishing minigames of, or hate, rather. When I was looking around at games that do have fishing minigames, one that came up a lot was the Breath of Fire series, which I had never heard about, and that's why I didn't include it. And a lot of people tout it as like one of the best fishing minigames ever, and I've never just heard of the game. So there's a lot of cases like that. Also, I have another version of this script that's based on not just the fishing minigame, but the entire fishing mechanics of the game as a whole, and how it fits into the game, if it's a good fit for that game. You know, Dredge would be a completely different situation, for instance. Sonic Adventure would too. So let me know if you're interested in seeing that version of this video. It just got a little too complicated and I kind of decided this would be better, but you know, it's right there. It's all recorded. All I'd have to do is edit it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and good night.